we're going to factor quadratics in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So this form's a little more complicated because you have a number multiplied by x squared. So there's a few more steps. And then we're going to factor this using the greatest common factor. Meaning we're not just going to factor out a number, we're actually going to factor the quadratic itself using a greatest common factor. So it starts out similar to when you just factor x squared plus bx plus c quadratics, when you don't have a number multiplied by x squared. So first, you have to figure out two numbers that add together to equal your b value, multiply together to equal a times c. Whatever that equals, these two multiplied together should equal that. Okay, just doing that, it splits your bx term into two. So using what two numbers you found, that helps you split your bx value into two. So you have ax squared plus your bx value is now split into 2 plus c. Then you're going to factor using the greatest common factor. So I'm going to show you how to do that. There are a few steps. So our first one, 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. So the first thing you can say, well, is there anything I can divide all these numbers by? No, they're not. These are all prime, so well, we can't divide them by the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to start by figuring out what two numbers, I'm just going to write it to the side, what I can add together to equal my b value, which is 7. And what I can multiply together to equal a times c. Well, 2 times 3 is 6. So they multiply together to equal 6. So in this case, that would be 1 times 6 is 6, and 1 plus 6 is 7. So all these numbers do are split this middle term into 2. So I still bring down my 2x squared, but now it's plus 1x plus 6x, and I bring down the plus 3. So all I did was split 7x squared into 1x plus 6x using this. Okay, so now here's where it gets a little tricky. I'm going to put parentheses around my first two terms and leave plus in the middle, put parentheses around my second two terms. Okay, so those parentheses didn't mean much because I still have two terms plus my first two terms plus my last two terms. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at what's in the parenthesis. I'm going to see if there's anything I can factor out, anything they have in common. Well, we have a 2 and a 1. Well, I can factor out 1, but that doesn't help me too much. We have an x squared and an x. I know I can factor x out because they each have at least one x. All right, 2x squared divided by x leaves me with 2x. I took one of the x's out. Plus 1x divided by x leaves me with 1. Plus, see, all I did was factor out the greatest common factor of this binomial. I have plus in the middle still. Now, 6x plus 3, my greatest common factor, well, it has to be a number because this one doesn't have a variable. I know I can divide both 6 and 3 by 3, so I'm going to factor out a 3. 6x divided by 3 leaves me with 2x, plus 3 divided by 3 is 1. So that's what was left in the parentheses after I factored out my greatest common factor. Okay, now I have a new greatest common factor. So I have x multiplied by 2x plus 1. I have 3 multiplied by 2x plus 1. That means my new greatest common factor is 2x plus 1 because each of these contain 2x plus 1. So I'm going to factor that out, 2x plus 1. And I'm going to multiply it by, remember after you factor out your greatest common factor, you multiply it by what's left over. So once I factored out 2x plus 1, I'm left with just x, plus when I factored out this 2x plus 1, I'm left with 3. So that means this is my quadratic factored. If I remultiply, I will get 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. Okay, so let's try that again. There are quite a few steps. Okay, so I have to figure out what I can add together to equal b, which is 10, what I can multiply together to equal a times c, so 3 times negative 8, which gives me negative 24. So what can I multiply together to equal negative 4, add together to equal negative or positive 10? Okay, so I know one's positive, one's negative. The larger one has to be positive because if I add them together and it equals a positive number, well, the larger one's positive. So let's do 12 times negative 2 is negative 4. 12 plus negative 2 is positive 10. So you might have to go through a few of the factors, but sometimes you get lucky and the first one you think of works. So 12 times negative 2 is negative 24. 12 plus negative 2 is positive 10. So that just splits our 10x into two terms. So I'm going to bring down my 3x squared plus 12x plus negative 2x, bring down the minus 8. You might be wondering why I didn't just write 12x minus 2x. I need plus in the middle. Remember how the one before, when I split, I put parentheses around my first two and last two terms, I wanted plus to be in the middle. So anytime you have a negative, just put plus your negative value. Okay. So I'm going to put parentheses around my first two terms, plus is in the middle, then parentheses around my last two terms. So as you saw before, when I factored something out, what I was left with, I wanted it to be the same for both of these. It needs to be the same, whatever is left over in the parentheses. So 3x squared plus 12x. Well, 3 and 12 can both be divided by 3, so I can factor that out. X squared and x, well, they both contain an x, so I know I can factor that out. 3x squared divided by 3x leaves me with just x, plus 12 divided by 3 is 4, x divided by x is 1, so I'm just left with 4. Plus, okay, let's see what we have over here. Remember what I want left over in parentheses to be the same for both of these, so it should be positive x plus 4. I know I have a negative here, so I do know that I need to factor out negative. Okay, they both can be divided by negative 2. Negative 2x divided by negative 2 is positive x. So I did get it to be positive x in each. Now let's see if we can, it's plus 4. Negative 8 divided by negative 2 is positive 4. It worked. So now we have a greatest common factor. We have x plus 4 in each of these. So I can factor out that greatest common factor of x plus 4. And I'm left with 3x plus negative 2 or just minus 2. All right. So there are quite a few steps, but if you take your time and make sure that you are doing each step, you'll get the answer. All right, so this one, figure out what I can add together to equal negative 6. What I can multiply together to equal 5 times 1 is 5. All right, so we can do negative 5 and negative 1, because negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5. Negative 5 plus negative 1 is negative 6. So that splits my negative 6x into 2. So here, we have to bring down our 5x squared plus negative 5x plus negative 1x. Bring down the plus 1. I just put plus the negative because I wanted to make sure that I had plus in between the parentheses. Okay, so parentheses around those two, parentheses around the last two. Let's see what we can factor out. All right, 5x squared plus negative 5x. I'm going to factor out a positive 5 because they can both be divided by 5, and I can factor out an x because they each have at least one x in them. 5x squared divided by 5x is x. Because 5 divided by 5 is 1. X squared divided by x is just x. Right, because this is inside the parentheses, I'm going to simplify. Plus a negative is the same thing as minus. 5x divided by 5x is 1. Don't forget, you have 1 left over. It doesn't equal 0. It's a very common mistake. It equals 1. Plus in the middle. All right, I need this x to be positive, right? Because we want what's left over in the parentheses after we factor something out. I need it to be positive in the parentheses. Because it's multiplied by negative 1, the only way to be left with positive x in the parentheses is if I factor out a negative 1. So you have to pay attention to what's positive, what's negative in this first parenthesis because it has to be the same in the second parenthesis. So negative 1x divided by negative 1 is positive 1x, which I can just write as x. Positive 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. So see how factoring out that negative 1 made it so what's left in the parentheses is the same. So you do have to pay attention to those positives and negatives because you want these two parentheses to be identical. Okay, so now x minus 1 is my greatest common factor. I'm going to factor out x minus 1, and the second parenthesis is going to contain what's left over after I factor out my greatest common factor. I'm left with 5x plus negative 1 or minus 1. All right, let's try another one. All right, well in this one, I can see that all of these are even. I know I can divide everything by 2, so I'm going to start by dividing everything by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, so I have 2x squared minus 10 divided by 2 is 5, so 5x, minus 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay, now, because I factored out a number, found my greatest common factor, now I'm going to start breaking this down. See what I can add together to equal negative 5. And it is easier with smaller numbers. What I can multiply together to equal 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. All right, so we have, let's see, I'm going to need a negative and a positive to multiply together to equal a negative. So I'm going to say negative 6 times positive 1 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. So that's what my middle term breaks down to. So I still have a 2 on the outside, 2 times 2x squared minus 6x. I didn't put plus negative 6x because I know I'm going to put parentheses around the first 2. But I do have to put plus in the middle. Plus 1x. Bring down that minus 3. Okay, so it was exactly the same, it's just that I split negative 6x plus 1x is negative 5x. Okay, so I have to put parentheses around my first 2 terms and my second 2 terms. I have to leave that times 2 on the outside. We'll deal with that later. Okay, so it just stays outside the giant parentheses. So I'm going to have 2 times something. All right, so ignoring that for now, in this first set of parentheses, well, I can divide 2 and 6 by 2. So I know I can factor out a 2. I have x squared and x. Each of them contains at least one x, so I can factor out an x. 2x squared divided by 2x is x, minus 6x divided by 2x is 3, because 6 divided by 2 is 3, x divided by x is 1, and 3 times 1 is 3. So that's my first parenthesis. Remember, plus is in between. Now I'm going to look at that second parenthesis. Well, it's just x minus 3, which I want it to be x minus 3, but you always have to factor something out, even if it's just the number 1, even if it's positive 1, so that we can factor a greatest common factor out, which would be the parentheses. if it wasn't multiplied by anything, like positive 1, then we couldn't factor it out. It has to be multiplied by something. So even though we want to leave it x minus 1, I'm going to factor out a positive 1. 1 times, if I factor out 1, it doesn't change it. It's still x minus 3. Because, well, remember 1x is the same thing as x. X divided by 1 is 1. Negative 3 divided by 1 is negative 3. So it didn't change it at all. Okay, so I still have this 2 outside the big parenthesis. So I have 2 times. My new greatest common factor, looking inside the parenthesis, is x minus 3. And that's multiplied by what's left over, 2x plus 1. Okay, because remember you have to have, we do have this 2 outside, but you have to have 2 binomials multiplied together. If we hadn't factored out that 1, well, we wouldn't have anything there, and it has to have something there. All right, so here are 4 problems for you to do. They're very similar. Go ahead and try them, and when you're ready, I'll go through the answers with you. All right, so the first one, what plus what equals 7, and what times what equals 6 times 2 is 12. So we can do 6 times 2, doesn't work. We can do 3 and 4, which does work. So this breaks down to 2x squared plus 3x plus 4x plus 6. If you reversed your 3x and 4x, you're going to get the same final answer as me, so don't worry. Put parentheses around your first 2 and your second 2. Here I can factor out an x, and I'm left with 2x plus 3. Plus, I can factor out a 2, and I'm left with 2x plus 3. Factor out my greatest common factor of 2x plus 3, and it's multiplied by x plus 2. Okay, so even if you reversed your 3 and 4, you would come up with this final answer. You might have the 2x plus 3 in front, which is fine. Okay, on this one, to see what we add together to equal negative 2, multiply together equal 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. So I'm going to say negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. So that splits that middle term. So we have 3x squared minus 3x plus 1x minus 1. So parentheses around the first 2 and the last 2. In the first one, we can factor out 3x. We're left with x minus 1. Don't forget you have to have 1 because 3x divided by 3x is 1. Plus, well, it's what I want it to be. So I do have to factor something out. So I'm just going to factor out 1. And it doesn't change. Our 1x I'm just going to write as x minus 1. Greatest common factor is x minus 1. And that's multiplied by 3x plus 1. Okay. Our third one, we have to figure out what we add together to equal negative 17. Multiply together to equal 4 times 4 is 16. So I'm going to say negative 16 times negative 1 is positive 16. Negative 16 plus negative 1 is negative 17. Again, it doesn't matter which order you put your numbers in, you'll still get the final answer the same. 4x squared minus 16x, I need to have a plus in the middle, so plus negative 1x. Bring down the plus 4. I'm going to put parentheses around the first 2 and the last 2 terms. The first 2 terms, I can factor out a 4x, which leaves me with x minus 4 plus. Okay, this last one's kind of tricky. I need it to be positive x and minus 4, but if I just factor out a 1, I'll have a negative x and a positive 4. I need it to be a positive x and a negative 4 over here also. So I can factor out a negative 1 and then it'll be correct. Negative 1x divided by negative 1 is positive 1x. positive 4 divided by negative 1 is negative 4. So always know you can factor out a negative to make what's in the parentheses be the same. So that's our new greatest common factor, x minus 4, times, what are we left with? 4x minus 1, or plus negative 1. All right, last one. Hopefully you're getting these. All right, I can see that I can divide everything by 2, and I'm left with 4 divided by 2 is 2x squared, minus 18 divided by 2 is 9x, minus 36 divided by 2 is 18. So now I'm going to figure out what I add together to equal negative 9 and what I multiply together to equal, I have to do 2 times negative 18 is negative 36. All right, so on this one, I'm going to say one's positive, one's negative. So I'm going to just make that first one negative. I'm going to say negative 12 times positive 3 is negative 36. Negative 12 plus 3 is negative 9. So that splits up my negative 9x. So we have 2 times 2x squared minus 12x plus 3x minus 18. Okay, I'm going to put parentheses around my first 2 terms in the big parentheses and my last 2. So we have 2 times. In the first parenthesis, I can factor out a 2 and an x. I'm left with 2x squared divided by 2x is x, minus 12x divided by 2x is 6, plus, second parenthesis, I can divide both by 3, so I'm going to factor out a 3. 3x divided by 3 is x, minus 18 divided by 3 is 6. And that's what I was looking for, x minus 6 to be the same in both. So my final answer, we still have the 2 factored out on the outside. Inside, my greatest common factor is x minus 6. And that's multiplied by what's left over, which is 2x plus 3. Hopefully you were able to factor these more complex quadratics.